So I haven't really had kind of just a brainstorm post in a while, since I've just been flaming you guys with a bunch of Descartes videos. Let's do something a little bit different, perhaps, and get back to some other ideas on the channel. So I have a good old-fashioned bongo schizo post for you, I guess. So, I guess I would want to start off with looking at some of the commentary that you have within the dialogue on Plato's Apology. And of course, with Plato's Apology, if we were gonna, do a rough look at some of the teachings, perhaps out of it, we would look at how the use of irony within Socrates himself. And so if we were to examine the examiner in that kind of way, we'd look at the state of Socrates in the trial during the Apology, where you have the brilliance of Socrates and his understanding of rhetoric and the difference of finding what is philosophy from rhetoric itself is perhaps one of the most important parts of philosophy of all. And so Socrates, using his philosophy of being in that kind of Heideggerian, I suppose, analysis, he is the sort of expert of human, the kind of humanities, if you will, I suppose, in the 21st century, which we'll kind of get to. But, there is that sort of ironic undertone of, despite Socrates and his wisdom and knowledge within the dialogue, he is in this predicament of, being killed by his own human beings in the Athenian trial. And so, I think this kind of delves into the sort of criticism and analysis that Nietzsche had to say about wisdom and reason in and of itself, where Socrates and his influence of sort of the method of cynicism and his stance towards being the gadfly of Athens, and questioning and deconstructing, I suppose, as Nietzsche would put it, and ultimately, delving away any sort of myth, any sort of art, as we come to understand with Socrates. He would absolutely ban art in his society, or in his ideal society. Art is just the lowly understanding of things to Socrates, as opposed to actually attaining knowledge. And so I think it's kind of interesting to look at, Socrates ultimately gets executed despite his wisdom and knowledge of rhetoric, and his accusation of using rhetoric to corrupt the youth in and of itself goes to show that Socrates' deployment of his own rhetoric undermines in that sort of Greek tragic ironic way, as he kind of points out in the dialogue. And I think this really actually is true about so much about life, and just a commentary in general of the state of affairs, as it were. And but what I mean by that is, you have sort of experts, and you have sort of disciplinary spaces who obtain knowledge and wisdom, and ultimately from that concludes that their expertise really is nothing. I mean, not so much nothing, but it's insufficient. And so Socrates, in all of his knowledge and wisdom, as he's put on trial for, is greater understanding as compared to his own witnesses, his reason, as it were. This ultimately leads him to knowing that he actually knows nothing. And I think that's really true with a lot of disciplines and expertise. The more you go down this sort of rabbit hole of your so-called expertise, the more you realize it really is insufficient in a greater sort of context from the perspective of outside of that realm. And this is a sort of critique I've went on before on the channel. But now I wanted to kind of use that and use the example of Socrates and the sort of irony of his understanding of the human condition ultimately leading him to being executed for it. And so from his wisdom, he ultimately knows that his wisdom actually leads to his own demise. And I think there's a character in particular that I watched in quarantine from my childhood, when you're all locked in and having to resort to entertain yourself with, something like Netflix or something. I'm sure everyone kind of sympathizes here, but I thought of Frasier Crane, but there was this particular episode that I want to really fix in on to make this all kind of work together. And the episode actually is called Death Becomes Him. And what happens in the course of the episode, of course, Frasier, in case you don't know, it was a TV comedy based out of, the setting is in Seattle. He's pretty neurotic, and he's a radio kind of psychiatrist, and he comes to grips with his blue collar dad, and he's also kind of at a standstill with him being post divorce from his original appearance in Cheers, and so obviously he is giving advice to people, to get along with family or to have this sort of unity and understanding of human emotions and conditions in this psychiatric setting, but yet he still struggles to be able to apply this wisdom to himself and his personal life. That's sort of a underlying commentary within the show. And I think this also is a very cunning to me, I suppose, but a very easy way to kind of digest perhaps a commentary on expertise in disciplinary spaces as it comes to today's world, of the kind of self-awareness of knowing his own sort of expertise, his sort of psychology is not sufficient enough in and of itself to actually give the great life that he wants to give to his audience. And so he struggles with that. But in this episode in particular, though, he goes and spirals down after a doctor, I think it's actually his father's doctor, which also kind of adds to the the meltdown of the episode. His father, is older and retired, and yet this guy who's, I think he is like a similar age, like midlife or whatever, he's going through his midlife crisis. He dies unexpectedly, I think from a heart attack or something like that. And Frasier spends the episode, milling over the fact that this doctor lived a very healthy, expertise-driven, rational lifestyle of, he was tremendously known throughout the episode for his dedication towards health and trying to live a good life. And despite this, he dies unexpectedly. So this obviously affects Frasier greatly because he kind of understands that, his expertise and reason obviously isn't sufficient enough to actually deliver the kind of life that he wants. And I think this ties back into the Socratic man and this sort of cynicism of deconstructing everything and never actually participating in life in and of itself, and missing the point of the performance of the forms, as I've talked about on the channel as well. the rational philosopher, as we're going over on the channel, and there will be more to come. I think Spinoza, in particular, is a really good example of this. He wants to bring about a sort of rational religion in a sort of pantheistic way. God is earth to him, and so you could use a rational understanding of God, if he's the world, a rational grounding towards the world. But where does this really lead him to? Exile and seclusion. And this also goes into the Socratic commentary of, the philosopher is ultimately just the loner gadfly who is there to diagnose, but he's tragic in his actual personal life. And I think this actually, to tie all in together, I suppose, and give the sort of commentary, the social commentary, not just for perhaps, public health crisis measures currently. You got to tote the line these days for YouTube. I guess that also kind of goes in hand with the commentary in and of itself, and the censorship. But nonetheless, you have to, consider ideologically. A lot of people are willing to constrain themselves, I see, for this sort of ideological pursuit of truth within it. And this ultimately could lead, or does lead. This is ultimately, I think, the grand irony of it is, Socrates is, of course, absolutely brilliant. He's one of my favorite philosophers. But that, shows that his wisdom doesn't necessarily, or really doesn't at all, lead to the life that most people would want to live. And there is that sort of tragedy of, we kind of look to the internet oddist and these sort of spurgy commentators to give us, what's what in the world. And I know that's like sort of self-diagnosing in and of itself, but it is that sort of tragedy of, we're on the kind of outside looking in, the theory bro, if you will, but yet he can't actually apply it to his own life. And I think this really does kind of go with a lot of the angst within the communities of being politically involved, of wanting to pursue truth or get away from narratives that don't seem to align with the life that you want to live. I think it's important to understand that just, the truth in and of itself won't necessarily lead to the kind of life that people actually want to live. And I kind of think, more than that, it, goes to show, in the last 2 years, that are you actually alive, or are you just living in that sort of way? What is the contents of life in and of itself? Is it, what is our identity in relation, and what do we expect out of people in that sort of way, as opposed to leading astray and not really getting into the actual performance of ritual. I think that's kind of the problem with these, pantheism and these sort of replacements of the Christian tradition, as we're going to go over in later videos. It kind of just leads you to your own sort of island, but misses the point of wanting to belong. And perhaps that kind of goes into, life, and why Socrates struggled so much with things like art, and seeing life as worth really living. Because I think, Socrates obviously in the end chooses to let himself die. He gets offered a chance to leave by the corrupted youth. They were more than willing to not just probably sacrifice themselves, but even, quite literally led him out of his captivity. But he chooses instead to not be a coward and stay true to philosophy. And I think it's important to discern perhaps that that should be dealt with, not just within a community of theory bros, but actually more of a civilizational question. Spengler's kind of commentary about even the willingness of wanting to have offsprings and the sort of symptom of decline within a culture. Now we look around us and we're kind of all have this sort of, I suppose, deposition that Frasier has within the Death Becomes Him episode would be what I would conclude on. And I think also there is a kind of other commentary perhaps to leave in part on with, life could be seen more as an orchestra of maintenance and performance of the good, as opposed to just letting it stand on some ideological conviction or just reason or just some abstraction, but actually in and of its performance and desire to want to belong and pursue peace. Perhaps would be my parting message with you guys today. And I hope you guys enjoyed this really ramble-esque video, but I wanted to take a break and do something different for a little bit. And I thank you guys for watching.